All right. I am live. Hello, this is Tim Sarantonio over there. And this is a little bit of a special birthday live stream to help celebrate the end of the launch campaign for the Generosity Roundtable and the work that I'm doing at my new adventure called the Generosity Spectrum. In all honesty, it's okay if get a bunch of people watching this or no people watching this. I'm using this to give a bit of a public update on my YouTube channel and my LinkedIn for people interested in what the heck have I been up to and where are we in the process, because we hit some really important milestones. What I'm actually going to do is even just kind of talk a bit about the core who, what, when, where, why, how. And if folks join to do a little bit of Ask Me Anything, then awesome. Otherwise, I'll spend about 15 minutes doing this and then getting ready for a little party that I'm going to have later today at 9 Pin Cider at 6:30 p.m. So if you don't know who I am, my name's Tim Sarantonio. I am founder of the Generosity Spectrum, a new educational gaming studio specifically focused on the nonprofit sector. And I am the creator, designer of the Generosity Roundtable, the nonprofit sector's first tabletop role-playing experience. What the heck does all that mean? Well, at the end of the day, I have been working for and with nonprofit organizations, boards of directors, community organizations, mutual aid organizations for nearly 20 years. And I ultimately thought I was going to be going into academia. And part of that is that I went to Teachers College, Columbia University, and that's where I started to learn about the importance of how we learn. And that's always been my obsession. That's always been what I have focused on. And so for me, everything I've done has been rooted in that education. So when I had the opportunity to just start to think about something other than working at a technology company, because that's what I was doing. I did that for near 15 years. And that was a lot of things that I learned. I got to talk to so many nonprofits. I ended up onboarding over 800 organizations to the technology that now a lot of people use. And back then it was, when I first started, there's only 300 nonprofits using Neon CRM. And now, there's a lot more. But especially when I started getting exposed to the work of the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, I started to think, there's something different on how we can approach these problems. It's never going to be one company. That's just not the reality of the economics anymore. I don't think the economics were ever there to justify that. But even beyond that, going back to just thinking on why people do the things that they do and make the decisions that they make, there's just so much that can distract the typical nonprofit leader. Some basic data, because that's what we are going to be talking about. And I'm going to use this to also talk a bit about the newest Fundraising Effectiveness Project data. So I'm going to actually get that ready so we can go over the report. Look, 97% of nonprofits in the United States alone are making under $5 million a year. The vast majority are under $1 million. And many of them are like my fiscal sponsor, the Connect Center. So I was even there earlier today. Ben Williams, fantastic leader in the capital region of upstate New York. He's been a deep collaborator, a deep friend. And it's hard. It's hard being an executive director of an organization like his. And even when we met today, there's so many things that can throw you off your game. And so I just kept seeing that not get solved with technology alone. And so in the world of artificial intelligence, right? I'm sober, so I'm not going to be taking a drink every time that somebody says that or mentions that. But, it's pretty hard to open up a platform like LinkedIn, for instance, and not see somebody talking about that. But the reality is that that's not going to solve the problem. I think it could do some cool things. I actually utilized Claude to do some really cool stuff with Cowork yesterday. But you need the context. You need to understand what's going on. And most of all, you need to also be aligned with other people. So over my career, both in working for small nonprofits, big nonprofits, and then transitioning onto the service provider side and working with tons of consultants too, I just saw a gap. And one of the biggest things that I think I've said pretty consistently over my career is that there is so little room for error. The margin of error is just paper thin for the vast majority of organizations. And even when I talk about the 97%, we also have to understand that a lot of development teams in these very large organizations, especially on the individual giving side, they might not have the resources that if you look on paper, you think that they do. There's a lot of peer-to-peer programs, for instance, that they're still bootstrapping things. Big nonprofits. And you'd be surprised about the budget behind the scenes or the investment into professional development that they are getting or not getting. And even when they get access to that professional development, it's going to cost them an arm and a leg. I'm about to fly to AFP ICON. Let's remove flights. Let's remove the increased costs of hotels in cities and situations like that. Just, how much are the tickets? How much is the food? What am I exactly getting for this experience? And again, I wrote about this earlier today in my newsletter. It's not even Icon's Icon. But I think we can think differently about all of these problems. And that's what led me to create the Generosity Roundtable, because ultimately we need to address risk. We need to make a more inclusive and honestly easier space for people to join and think about generosity, experiment with their ideas on what generosity means. And so if you even listen to my podcast episode that I did for the Flux podcast on Tap Philanthropy, had a great call with that team earlier today. Love working with them. And that's because I get to interview really cool people like Jen Chang. And so philanthropic psychology has heavily influenced me. And so I ultimately looked around last summer and said, I want to do something different. I don't want to make a technology company. I don't want to be a consultant in the traditional sense. I have great partners like Julia Campbell and Rachel D'Souza and Michael Buckley. That's how they want to do things. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And so I came up with this concept of educational gaming. And not just that, but also how can we make it that anybody can pick this up? One of the folks that I'm going to be seeing at my zine making party, my birthday gathering that I'm going to have in a bit. And I'll kind of talk a bit how we got here, what's next. We'll talk about FEP, and we'll wrap it up for today, right? And so ultimately, and if you are joining, feel free to comment, feel free to ask questions. But ultimately, this is just, again, a little bit of a public accountability update. And so when I looked around and I said, I'm not sure how we could solve things. And I sat down with some of the folks that I trust. And so Megan Meyerson, who I'm going to see later at the little gathering that I'm having, she was one of the first people that I talked to. And her and Eric Guzman, we had a little bit of a breakfast. I do a lot of breakfasts. And sat down at a nice, the Iron Gate in Albany. And I was basically like, this is this idea. I think we could talk more about generosity and motivation and identity. And they said, that's great. If it costs above this amount, we have to go ask somebody for something. So I started thinking, what does it look like for a truly accessible professional development option for nonprofits? And the other thing that I believe is that we're much stronger listening to each other. People lock in when you kind of get into that Seth Godin, people like us do things like this. Well, okay. How about we fill in that blank across the board for all the people who work in the nonprofit sector, in fundraising, in programs, in volunteer management, in accounting, in event planning, in fractional services, grant writing, you name it. Why can't we have a unified and clear conversation? Why can't we ever seem like we're on the same page? And so I'm not going to go into all the things that led to the kind of stumbling through the different games and ideas. Like, there was some real awful things that I rolled out. Like, a bunch of the people back in October experienced a really like haphazard presentation of where I thought that we can go. And every single step, and this is the space that we need to be able to give our nonprofit leaders, is it's going to take time to figure this type of stuff out. So I had a few months to be able to do that. I have some built-in privileges, and I also had some great support from people. And so I was able to have the space to kind of figure out, at least up until this point, what could this look like? And I had a lot of great partners and great people. In fact, at AFP ICON, I'm going to announce my most exciting collaboration yet. It's going to be related to Julia Campbell and the Nonprofit Social Media Summit. Tune in either Monday or Tuesday. I'm going to lock that in, but definitely by Tuesday, it's a whole new world, folks. And so I'm really excited about that, because I ultimately want to build a peer learning network where people are not just gathering around the game that I've designed, and I'll talk a little bit about that before we transition into FEP, but then I want people to be able to share their own skills. I want them to be able to share their own things that they're thinking through and ways that they're solving the problem. So how is this all going to work? So I have gotten my initial campaign funded through a combination of individual gifts, corporate support, donor advised fund support, and pending some potential larger discussions or things like that, I could be just focusing on just trying to get this in front of as many people as possible while I just kind of keep it very bootstrapped and very focused. So right now, the plan is to not sell the game itself online, but there are some structures that I'm going to be exploring over the next 2 months. But when somebody gets the game, and I'm going to be handing out a bunch at AFP ICON, there's a few people that I've connected with to reach out and to kind of establish the basics here, because it's one thing for me to do everything. But the reality is that we should be empowering anybody to be able to do this in their own city, their own community. And that's what's so cool about the Generosity Roundtable, is it's going to come in a box like this. This is a brand, like a literal brand, electric iron brand that I got yesterday. I've been playing around with that. Check out my Instagram or YouTube shorts for a little bit of a fun overview of how that process is going. Again, we're learning. So imagine that's going to be on the front of this. I'm going to have a bunch of those done by Friday. I've been able to buy 100 boxes. So we're going to start with the network, ideally covering all 50 states is my goal by end of the year. 100 folks, and philanthropy or direct, people buying into the network. At the worst, that's what's going to happen. So every box, you'll get maybe a little thing. If you want to write your name on the box, you could do that, but you're going to get this nice pine wood box. I got these from the Enchanted World of Boxes in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I worked with Sticker Giant to get one of these. Not a fan of Sticker Mule, even though they're local. And so I also was able to design, after months of direct play testing. That's what you do when you design a game, is you play test things with folks. So this is the culmination of dozens and dozens of conversations and careful discussions and online play with Julia Campbell and Ben Williams. And then I worked with my designer, Paul Angle, to create all of these beautiful things. And so check out my YouTube channel. I did some silly stuff where I even was able to clone myself. A lot of this is just learning, right? I didn't know how to clone myself on TikTok. I watched some YouTube videos on that. I didn't know how electric iron brands worked. I watched some YouTube videos on that, or I read some directions from Gemini to get some guidance there. I didn't know how to make zines, but I looked at things that my friends did in the past and was able to draw inspiration from that, or find some basic templates on Canva. And these are things that you can do too. And you have your own superpowers within you when it comes to creating this. So the game is going to come with a few different things. You got the box, you got some nice little goodies in there, but then think of that as the hardware, right? Like that's your Nintendo Switch 2. And then you have your ability to create characters rooted in philanthropic psychology. You are kind of walking in the shoes of somebody else. Or maybe you're playing a different version of yourself. You're playing a concept, right? That's what we're going to be doing at the Fundraising Effectiveness Project next Monday. Is we're going to kind of divide people into 3 different groups: individuals, corporations, and foundations. And we're going to have the folks who are attending explore what are the motivations of somebody who cares about the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. What type of person is motivated to care about data benchmarks that are going to be trusted by people of all different types and sizes of organizations, right? Like, that's a thing that I'm excited about. Who else is also excited about that? Now, I'm excited enough that I'm going to show you some of the data very shortly, but ultimately the way that things are going to work is that people are going to play. They can play anywhere, right? All you need is this. All you need is this. You could even take the cards out of this and sneak them in without the box, right? You put it in a little bag. You could throw it in your book bag. Doesn't matter. All you have to do is just walk around with this. And it's got everything that you need. And technically, you don't even need the box. If you want to play the game, you can just talk it out. A lot of this stuff is going to be on a website that should be launched by next week. Been working with my best friend, Mark, and Christina, one of his collaborators, to get a basic Shopify website. So if you want to be able to buy this hat, you're going to be able to do that starting next week. Because those types of things are going to also be reinvested back into building the peer learning network. I got enough to get the game out in the world. Now, what does it look like to make sure that we continue to learn from each other while we play the game? That's it. So the next few months, I hit my goal. So I'm going to be talking with individual people who might want to do collaborative projects. I'm going to, announce one big campaign thing next week, but I can talk to anybody that I want. Anybody who thinks this is a good idea. It could be an academic institution, a community foundation, a technology company, a consultancy, a national or state network or a regional group, volunteer groups, mutual aid organizations, political organizations, union groups, kids, eventually. That's the idea. I already know that this can work because my kids have thought about it that way. They're excited about that. So the possibilities are endless when you want to gather people around to understand what the risks are and what's going to motivate you to work through and have consensus about that. It's a consensus game, right? There is no winning. You just explore. So, with that said, let's go ahead and explore a bit of the Fundraising Effectiveness Project data that have just come out, and then we'll wrap it up for today because I got some zine parties to get ready, right? So we're going to put together some scenario booklets. I'm going to tell people how I made these and maybe even inspire to create new ones, right? I got some really cool ideas that we can do on even some cultural stuff. So we're looking at this. Let me add it to the stage. Here we are. Okay, so this is the new report. How fancy, right? You go to fetreports.org. And so this is pretty exciting because you could kind of hover over these things. You can get a little bit more information about the methodology here, the key findings and executive summary that were heavily influenced or written by our fundraisers subcommittee. Want to thank Alice Ferris and Marianne Turn for the work that they've been doing to kind of oversee that work for the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. If you don't know what FEP is, it's the most trusted data benchmark offering in the nonprofit sector. It focuses on transactional data, so I don't want to kind of pull out any other inferences on anything other than what this data does. You're interested on that, go to the methodology, but it is a lot. Millions of donors, billions of dollars the 15,000 organizations as part of this panel. The typical survey that you see, like an M&R benchmark, is just a few hundred nonprofits, right? This dwarfs that. So one of the things that I'm excited about is this strategic insights area. And so you're able to kind of even drill in here and learn a little bit more about what you should be focusing on. When we worked with Meena Das and Namaste Data last year on a survey, the most important thing people were doing was educating their leadership on this data. And then they were making strategic adjustments. They're not necessarily getting into the weeds with this data. That's where you can work with, your technology provider or a consultant or maybe a peer learning network to be able to do that. But we look at donors, we look at dollars, we look at retention. So the typical narrative is donors down, dollars up, retention a little up. So let's focus in on retention, because that's ultimately the big thing that I'm focused on at the generosity spectrum, is what is going to retain talent and what is going to retain our communities to increase participation. And so one of the biggest things that I think is important is focusing on donor type, new donor retention rate. These are people who only their first gift was in a prior period and then they donated to the current period, meaning they donated in 2024 and then they came back in 2025, because that's what we're looking at is all 2025 data here. Only 18.9% of people did that. Basically no change from previous analysis. But I've been sounding the alarm on this particular data point for years. Now, what is interesting is that the repeat donor retention rate actually went up a bit, and it's very strong. As you can see, it's about 60%. So these are people who are continuing to be repeat donors. And so this is strong. A lot of this is driven by more affluent gift sizes, larger gift sizes. But at the end of the day, retention is retention. I think that the real focus is to increase the spaces where people feel that they can come back and feel welcome again into your communities of generosity, as well as continuing to strengthen your existing retention. You can also even see this by the size of the gift. As you can see, micro retention continues to struggle and fall. And then we actually even saw a little bit of an uptick of the folks who were giving pretty large gifts. And that's not necessarily a narrative that we want to hold forever, but it is still bright spots, right? Like we don't want to sneeze at the fact that people still give, but we want to make it that everybody feels that they're going to be part of this. I think that what's really great about FEP is that it also gets into cause sizes and organization sizes. One of the misconceptions of the Fundraising Effectiveness Project is that it's only for small nonprofits. That is definitively not true, especially because we started to expand the number of data providers that are part of the initiative. And so you can see both organization sizes as well as cause areas. So somebody like Michael Buckley can get a little bit of a deeper dive into environmental and animals, for instance. So I this is something that I've spent a fair amount of my volunteer career, so to speak, investing into. I am concluding my direct involvement as chair in September, but I am excited to see folks at the at AFP ICON. I hope that if you are there, that you can join me, Julia Campbell, and Caitlin Wion on Sunday at 4:30 Pacific time. We're going to have a little bit of a launch party, very similar to what I'm doing tonight. Very chill. You can pop in, you can pop out. Very also influenced by Newt Punkt, the Nordic LARPing conference, live action role playing conference that I just attended. And so in Sweden, in Göteborg. And so there is always an empty seat to make sure that people feel welcome. And if you got something else to do, that's all good. We're just going to be kind of exploring the game, the cards. I should have everything by Friday at the latest, and then we are good to go. Speaking of which, I'm going to be good to go for you today. I want to thank you for tuning in and watching this either live or at another time. And I can't wait to get this out into the world, into your hands, and game on. Talk to you soon.